Hi everyone, welcome to my video. My name is Lane, and together with my partner Zubin, we're going to be diving into the fascinating world of video games, how they teach us about learning and identity. We'll be exploring ideas from James Paul Guy's groundbreaking work, Learning and Identity. So let's get started. Alright, first off, just a little introduction about James Paul Guy. He was a big figure earlier in this class. We read about his other work, but in this work, we're going to be talking about what video games have to teach us about learning and identity. So Guy explores how video games can be powerful tools for learning by leveraging the concept of identity. So we're going to break down these key ideas and see how they apply to gaming and how that relates to education. Let's talk about semiotic domains. These are areas or sets of practice where specific signs, words, symbols, images, songs, anything carry different meanings. These domains include like math, music, video games, or like subsets within a video game. So each domain has its own like language, rules, and conventions where one must learn to participate effectively in the domain. Part of this big thing is Guy emphasizes that learning in any domain is more than just acquiring knowledge. It requires mastering the symbols and signs that define the practices and the way of thinking. So in video games in particular, semiotic domains encompasses like narratives, rules, visuals, mechanics that the players must use. So for example, he gives the game Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. You need to know more than just the storyline or game mechanics. Players must interpret the in-game symbols, understand character attributes, and strategize based on the game's logic or their own personal narratives or choices that they want to make with their character. So this deep engagement with the semiotic domain mirrors the way that people could learn with academic subjects in real life, just like embracing it and learning all those different things. And he suggests that video games effectively can teach these complex concepts through different immersive experiences. Navigating these domains involves taking on new identities. So here's the 3 different types of identities that he talks about in the paper. The 3 different types of identities he talks about are the virtual identity, the real world identity, and the projective identity. So the virtual identity is the identity that the player creates in the game. So in this paper, he creates this half-elf who has various characteristics. And the characters, you can construct in this game specific traits, roles, and then choose from a list of backstories. These traits are typical RPG traits such as charisma and strength, and boosting these stats affects how you play the game, and the player as you play through can take on these stats and upgrade and spec into different areas. So in the whole time you're creating this virtual identity, but every player comes with a real identity as well. He talks about James Paul Guy talks about in the paper how he personally has all these different identities, and he talks about how he's Anglo-Saxon, he's a baby boomer, he's a professor, he was formerly Roman Catholic, and he's losing a bunch of hair. So all of these things play into this is his real world identity, which influences how he's going to interact within the game and within his virtual identity. So for example, he gives something about a brothel in the game and how his former Roman Catholic tendencies caused him to be less likely to interact and engage with that. And then the third form of identity is the projective identity. And this is essentially the bridge between the virtual and the real world identity. It's how the player projects themselves into that virtual identity with their real ones. So a player might create a character who's like resilient and collaborative, or smart, or strong and slow, and they can push these traits onto the character in different ways, and it's often depending on their real world identity. And the reason it's called projective is because they choose to project their own goals and aspirations, whether for themselves or for their virtual character, onto into the game. And this projection and development can help players identify skills and insights applicable in the real world. Another critical aspect that he talks about, which he says is actually more important than the semiotic domains, is what he calls a psychosocial moratorium. And he talks about it's a learning space in which the learner takes real world consequences, and they're just lower. The player can take risks, experiment, and learn through trial and error, but the real-world consequences that would normally come associated with those failures are significantly reduced and non-existent. So there's a relatively low cost of failure, and there's high reward for success, because typically, like, if you fail in a game, you can just restart or reload the game or reload a different save. There's different ways where this could be applied in real life, in a real classroom. And he talks about there's 3 different goals. So the learner must be enticed to try. So they need to have incentive or a reason why they'd want to try to do something. And this is done through building bridges from the virtual to the real world identities, and then creating a psychosocial moratorium. And this they also need to have a stake in learning or compelling. There needs to be some thing that draws them in, some reason to do it. So they need to get sucked into the game, and stories and characters and all these different things. Having some reward is what creates this. And then the last thing is the levels of success for different amounts of effort. So if you put in like minimum effort, you're not just going to get the maximum success that you put in with the maximum effort, because this ensures that the buy-in stays consistent and that people will increase effort to increase results. A part of identity he talks about that needs to be repair. If you have a damaged identity before playing something or trying to learn something, then the player will not be able to critically learn. And this happens, he gave the example when he tried to play real-time strategy games where he's limited by time, and he came in with the notion that he was already bad at that, and so by doing that he can't create the bridge between the real-world identity of being a scientist, for example, learning in the classroom, and the identity of him as a child who thinks that he can't do it. So incorporating these active and critical learning strategies can enhance education. So by adding on hands-on activities, interactive simulations, problem-based learnings, all of these things are put together well in games. And he argues that these can be used to teach things in real life by focusing on these ideas and how these are accomplished. Also, critical learning encourages students to process and get deeply involved, but they must be able to use the identity, which is so key. I don't want to use the word so key to this whole conversation, and they need to be able to develop these identities of learning. And if they come in with a damaged identity, one where they think that the learner cannot do this, and they have this preconceived notion that they can't, they won't be able to. And he gives the example of playing a Star Wars real-time strategy game where he came in with the notion that he wasn't good at doing things fast and racing against the clock, and so he's already unable to learn by making himself think that he can't learn. So people have to come in with the idea that they can learn to be able to. So to conclude and summarize what we've talked about, James Paul Gee explores identity and learning in video games, specifically the Magic Arcanum game Arcanum of Steam, that we've shown and discussed throughout this video. He examines the roles of semiotic domains and identities, and then demonstrates that video games offer unique opportunities for active and critical learning. And he scores that the principles of learning in video games can and should apply in traditional education to create far better, engaging, and effective learning principles. And he encourages educators to seek out new educational practices that can improve and incorporate these principles from video games to create more impactful and better learning outcomes for students. With that, I have 3 discussion questions for you. How can the concept of projective identity enhance student engagement in real-world learning environments? The next question I have is, in what ways can educators create this psychosocial moratorium in the classroom to encourage risk-taking and exploration? And the final question, how can the amplification of the input principle be applied to traditional educational methods to improve student motivation and learning outcomes?